The day the fortress lost its face. January 11th, 1944, 26,000 feet above central Germany, late morning. The sky is clear in a way that makes men uneasy. Sunlight glints off hundreds of aluminum wings as the bomber stream stretches across the sky, B-17 flying fortresses in tight combat boxes, engines droning in disciplined unison. Below them, the German countryside lies frozen and deceptively calm. Snow-dusted fields, rail yards, factories already bristling with flak batteries. Inside one of those fortresses, the cold is relentless. Frost clings to the interior skin of the aircraft, crawling along rivets and seams. Oxygen masks hiss softly with every breath. Gloved hands ache despite layers of wool and leather. At the controls sits First Lieutenant William "Bill" Harris, aircraft commander, eyes locked forward, jaw tight, posture rigid. They are minutes from the target. The bombardier, Second Lieutenant Charles Mayer, lies prone in the nose, peering through the plexiglass of the bombardier compartment. The Norden bombsight rests beneath him, stabilized and humming quietly. Charts are clipped, stopwatch ready, everything is routine. Too routine. Then the sky erupts. A flak shell detonates just ahead of the formation, black smoke blooming like a sudden storm cloud. Another bursts to the left, then another. Flak at 12 o'clock, someone shouts over the intercom. The fortress shudders as concussive waves slap against its fuselage. Shrapnel rattles like thrown gravel across aluminum skin. Harris grips the yoke, holding formation. Breaking now would be worse than the flak. Then it happens. There is no warning, no gradual build-up, no time to brace. A deafening crack slams through the aircraft, violent and absolute. The nose of the B-17 disappears. Not damaged, not shattered, gone. The plexiglass bombardier compartment is torn away in a single instant, ripped off as if by a giant hand. Aluminum framing folds outward. Metal screams. The sudden pressure change explodes through the fuselage, blasting freezing air, charts, wires, and debris backward into the cockpit. Where the nose existed seconds ago, there is now only open sky. Wind howls into the aircraft at over 200 miles per hour, a living force that tears at everything not bolted down. Loose equipment vanishes instantly, sucked into the slipstream. Frost forms in midair. Snowflakes whip straight into the cockpit. For a split second, no one speaks, because no one understands what they're seeing. Then Harris feels it, the controls go light, wrong, loose. The aircraft lurches violently to the right, then dips nose down. Warning lights flicker. The altimeter spins. The intercom erupts in overlapping shouts, cut off by static and wind. Bombardier. Jesus Christ. The nose. There is no bombardier anymore. Lieutenant Mayer is gone, either torn from the aircraft or crushed instantly. There is no time to think about it, no time to mourn. The fortress is pitching toward a dive. Harris fights the instinct drilled into every pilot to yank back hard on the yoke. He knows better. If the control surfaces are damaged, a sudden correction could snap what little remains. He eases back instead, slowly, carefully. The aircraft responds barely. Behind him, co-pilot Lieutenant Frank Doyle stares forward, eyes wide, stomach dropping. He can see the sky. Not through glass. Through nothing. Snow and debris tear into the cockpit. The temperature plummets instantly. Oxygen lines strain to compensate for the sudden pressure loss. Blood from minor cuts freezes on exposed skin. Someone yells, the nose is gone. No one argues. The navigators station is half destroyed, maps plastered to bulkheads by frost. The Norden bombsight, guarded like a state secret, is simply gone, ripped away along with its mounting. In its place, control cables hang exposed, vibrating violently in the open air like taut steel veins. The fortress shudders again as another flak burst detonates nearby. Outside, the formation is already pulling ahead. No bomber can slow down over Germany. Not here, not under flak, not with fighters inbound. The crippled B-17 is alone. Harris forces his breathing steady. He tests the ailerons millimeter by millimeter. The response is sluggish, delayed, but real. "We still have control," he says into the intercom, voice strained but calm. "Easy movements only." The engineer's voice crackles back. "Sir, the cables are exposed. They're moving, but they're shaking like hell." Bare cables. No armors. No redundancy. Nothing between control and catastrophe. Every adjustment now pulls directly on steel lines whipping in the slipstream. One sharp maneuver, one panic-induced correction, and they will snap. Below them, Germany rolls past in brutal clarity. Flak towers track new targets. Fighters will be here any second. Inside the open front of the aircraft, ice forms instantly on every surface. Frostbite begins within minutes. The wind makes speech almost impossible. And yet, the fortress keeps flying. Not diving, not breaking apart, still airborne. Somewhere nearby, another erupts into smoke and flame. No one looks. Because right now, every man aboard understands the truth settling in their bones. They are flying a bomber that no longer has a face. And if they lose control, even for a second, it won't spiral down. It will come apart. The fortress drifts slightly out of formation, falling behind the bomber stream like a wounded animal. Black flak bursts fade into the distance as the main force pushes on toward the target. The radio crackles, then goes dead, antenna damage. They are alone now, suspended over hostile territory in a machine that should already be falling. Lieutenant Harris keeps his hands locked on the yoke, not gripping it so much as listening to it. Every vibration, every tremor travels straight through the exposed control system into his palms. The aircraft feels alive, injured, unstable, but responsive if treated gently. Behind him, the flight engineer, Technical Sergeant Al Morris, crawls forward on his stomach, boots braced against the deck, eyes fixed on the exposed cables whipping back and forth in the open nose. The wind is so loud it's painful. Frost bites through his gloves as he reaches out, not touching the cables, just watching. "They're holding," he shouts, "but barely." The bomber loses another 100 feet. One engine coughs, oil pressure dropping. Harris trims carefully, redistributing load, easing tension on the forward control runs. Every adjustment is deliberate, restrained. He refuses to rush. That restraint saves them. Dark shapes peel down from above. "Fighters 12 high," the tail gunner yells. Messerschmitt Bf-109s drop out of the sun, wings flashing, noses down. To their pilots, the sight below is absurd. A B-17 flying without a nose. A kill already claimed. The first fighter opens fire. Tracer rounds streak past the open cockpit. Flashing inches from Harris's face. The sound is torn apart by the wind, but the impacts are unmistakable, thuds and punches as bullets tear into the fuselage aft. The fortress shudders, but Harris does not move. Any sudden maneuver could snap the cables. "Hold it," he mutters, "hold it." The tail gunner answers with a burst from his 50 caliber machine guns. Empty casings rattle across the deck. One fighter overshoots, startled, expecting the bomber to break, to dive, to die. It doesn't. It just keeps flying. Another German pilot lines up for a second pass, aiming for the cockpit, then hesitates. There is no glass to shatter, no compartment to destroy, just men exposed to open air, still alive, still fighting. Inside the fortress, Morris sees something that makes his stomach tighten. One cable, just forward of the cockpit, has begun to fray. Individual steel strands vibrate loose, shimmering in the slipstream. "Sir," he yells into the intercom, "pitch cable starting to go." Harris nods, though Morris can't see him. He eases off pressure immediately, compensating with trim instead of force. The aircraft settles slightly, stabilizing enough to reduce strain. Minutes pass. Real minutes. Each one feels impossible. The fighters circle again, confused now. This isn't bravery they're facing, it's something worse. Defiance. Another flak burst detonates below, harmless now. The real danger is structural failure. The torn edges of the nose section vibrate violently, stress fractures creeping outward with every oscillation. The navigator, Lieutenant Sam Klein, ties himself off with a rope and crawls forward as far as he dares. His face is numb. Ice coats his eyebrows. He wedges padding scavenged from a seat cushion against the bulkhead, pressing it carefully against the cable run. It dampens the vibration just enough. The German fighters make one last pass, firing half-heartedly, then peel away. Escort fighters are closing in. Fuel is precious. The crippled fortress is no longer worth the risk. The sky empties. Silence returns, but it's fragile. Harris checks his watch. Nearly 10 minutes. 10 minutes without a nose. 10 minutes with exposed controls. 10 minutes one vibration away from death. "We are turning west," he says, slowly. The turn is agony. He eases the yoke left by fractions of an inch. The cables tighten, hum, then settle. Sweat freezes on his forehead. The aircraft resists, then obeys. When the turn completes, no one speaks. They are heading home. But the hardest part still waits ahead. The return flight stretches into something unreal, time distorted by cold, exhaustion, and the constant awareness that the aircraft is being held together by restraint alone. The bomber limps westward, every mile earned, every vibration judged and absorbed. The open nose turns the cockpit into a wind tunnel. Air screams through the forward fuselage, pulling heat from skin, freezing sweat into ice. Frostbite creeps into fingers and cheeks. Oxygen masks struggle to keep up. Speech is reduced to shouted fragments. Engine 3 holding. Altitude steady. Cables still intact. No one mentions what happens if they're not. Lieutenant Harris refuses to descend too quickly. Slower airspeed means less stress on the cables, but too slow, and the aircraft risks a stall it may not recover from. He walks the edge carefully, riding trim and throttle like a tightrope. Below them, the English Channel appears at last. No one cheers. They know landing will be worse. Approach requires precision, exactly what their damaged control system can barely provide. Harris circles wide, bleeding off fuel, reducing weight. The engineer crawls forward again, eyes never leaving the exposed control runs. "If they start to go," Morris shouts, "I'll call it." The runway comes into view. Ground crews are already staring. The bomber descends shallow and slow, nose yawing slightly, control response delayed and uneven. Harris eases the yoke back too gently. The fortress slams onto the runway, bounces once, then again. The cables scream under tension. For a heartbeat, it feels like they might snap. Then the wheels bite. The aircraft skids, shudders, and finally rolls to a stop, engines coughing, steam rising from frost-coated metal. Silence. For several seconds, no one moves. Then someone laughs, sharp, almost hysterical. Outside, ground crews run toward the aircraft and stop dead. They are staring at something that should not exist. A B-17 flying fortress. Without a nose. Control cables hanging in open air. Returned intact. A crew chief removes his cap slowly, running a hand through his hair. "This bird should have broken up," he mutters. Maintenance officers photograph everything. Engineers trace the exposed control paths, shaking their heads. One lieutenant colonel crouches near the torn fuselage, studying the frayed cable ends. "These should have failed," he says quietly, "vibration alone." He doesn't finish. Lieutenant Harris climbs down last. His legs tremble when they touch the ground. Someone hands him a cigarette. He doesn't remember lighting it. Word spreads across the airfield within minutes. Did you see that one? The nose is gone. They flew it back like that. The verdict comes quickly. She'll never fly again. The damage is too extensive, the airframe compromised, the risk unacceptable. The bomber is stripped for parts, cannibalized to keep others flying. Her war is over, but her message remains. In briefings across bomber groups, photographs circulate, pilots study them closely. The lesson isn't heroics, it isn't luck. It's restraint. Smooth control under damage, discipline over instinct, the understanding that survival sometimes depends not on fighting harder, but on touching less. German pilots that day believed they were firing at a corpse. They were wrong. They were attacking something far more dangerous. A crew that refused to accept the verdict of physics. Years later, engineers would cite cases like this when designing new aircraft, rerouting control systems, adding redundancy, reinforcing survivability. The brutal lessons of the Flying Fortress shaped the future of aviation. But in that moment, high above Europe, none of that mattered. What mattered was a pilot easing the yoke by inches, an engineer watching cables shake, a crew holding their breath for 10 impossible minutes. They didn't cheat death. They negotiated with it. And somehow, they won.